You're listening to a classic business podcast as heard on Classic 1027. 1027. This is Classic Business on Classic 1027 in Johannesburg and Fine Music Radio in Cape Town. Wealth and investment feature.
Well, the Knight Frank Wealth Report has been released today. Joining me for discussion on some of the report's main findings is Knight Frank's CEO for South Africa, Richard Hardie. Richard, good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. It's a fairly lengthy report on really the high net worth market globally and just on the wealthy. Give us just an understanding of the methodology utilized in order to come up with this report and why this report is important.
Good evening. This report's been going since 2007, so it's got a very good track record and the research behind it. The purpose of it is to track wealth around the world. It's not just about property. It's also about investment. And interestingly, also what we've seen this year and going into a new decade as well, is we've seen a real shift in the report, is that there's a large section about wellness.
And generally, the target market for this kind of report, is this people in the wealth space, or people that manage assets, for instance? Is it that kind of market?
So, the report has always targeted the ultra high net worth, which is people who've got $30 million worth of assets, and also high net worths as well, which is predominantly the Knight Frank client base globally. Knight Frank is known as a luxury brand, and then obviously it's very useful for all the finance sectors, the wealth managers, etc., etc. But the whole point about it is that it's not just about property, real estate. It takes other factors into consideration. If you've looked through the report, the theme this year, the highest rising collectible actually is a Hermes handbag, depending on where you come from. And that's seen a 6% rise, whereas last year it was whiskey. But if you take a 10-year period, whiskey has actually seen the highest growth percentage-wise. So it's about collectibles, property, assets, investments, and it's just tracking those trends globally. But it is very much targeted at the ultra-high net worth market.
Talking about handbags, collectible handbags, as you said, it has topped the Knight Frank Luxury Investment Index, rising in value by 13% over 12 months to the fourth quarter of 2019. It knocked rare whiskey off its number one position. So just to give an indication to listeners this evening, the annual change for people buying handbags is a year-on-year change of 13%. Rare whiskey is only up by 5%. Art is only up by 5%. Watches 2%, and then jewelry actually saw a decline of minus 7% and cars of minus 7%. So what in your opinion drives these spending habits? Why handbags all of a sudden?
So handbags has only really come into the report this year, because it's the first time that well-known brands that have been around for a long time have suddenly started coming to auctions. So your auction houses, for example, Christie's sold a Hermes Himalaya and Loticus Crocodile 30 handbag with gold and diamond hardware, and that was sold through Christie's in 2017. So it's those sorts of bags which are only just coming to auction, so you can only now just start to track them. And I think also it's about the type of society. We're a much more sort of consumer-driven society, and there are various collectibles that have been around for years. If you look at stamps, for example, and then there's wine, there's classic cars, etc., etc. But this is a new trend. People have always had them, but we're only just starting to see people selling them off for these high prices. I mean, that one that I mentioned before, I think I said $386,000 it sold for.
That's a lot of money for a handbag. I mean, it's well worth noting as well that that rare whiskey on a 10-year change basis actually increased by 564%.
Yeah, and there was that bottle that sold for 1.2 million.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder if you drink it, if you spend $1.2 million, I'm assuming.
I suspect you keep it and you sell it.
The other big component, obviously, of this report is it looks at residential homes and second home markets, and then it looks obviously at cities where individuals reside. One of the big things that come from the report is that large Chinese cities no longer see 30% plus growth rates, but places like in Europe, like Frankfurt, saw a 10% increase in I suppose luxury homes. Lisbon 9%, Athens 7%, and Berlin at 6.5%. So there seems to be a move back into Europe. Is that correct?
There is, but you've also got to consider what those cities have done. And we talk about, and the big theme of the Wealth Report this year is wellness. And those cities that you've mentioned have really focused on wellness, and they've created lifestyles within those cities. They've created safe places for people to go, where there's culture, there's lifestyle. Green spaces are very important for people. And, you know, all of those cities that you've mentioned have had a major drive towards creating stability, wellness, safety centres, and that's the reason why those cities have come out on top.
I mean, a city like Oslo, I think you've rated as, from a wellness perspective, is one of the top places to live.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's about all of those factors that I mentioned before. You know, people want to have that all-round feeling of lifestyle, and I guess that the closest you can compare it to here is, you know, the development of all of these lifestyle security estates that you've got in South Africa. You know, people, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you know, the world is in a funny place at the moment, and people are looking for stability. And if you bring it back to South Africa, you know, people are investing into these security estates where you come in, you've got security, your children can play in the road. They might have a golf course, they might have a polo club, they've got clubs that would involve swimming pools, and now a lot of these estates have got, you know, they've got schools on them, or they've got a school very near them. So yeah, it's you know, it's a global trend, and you know, it's ever increasing in South Africa especially.
I mean, so from a wellness perspective, I mean, Oslo is number 1, Zurich is number 2, and Helsinki is in a similar place as Zurich, also at number 2. But then, most important here is the City Wealth Index. It seems that New York continues to be the place that people with wealth will want to live in. London follows that at number 2.
Yeah, New York has bounced back. I think there's always been a fight between London and New York. You know, London's has been affected greatly by Brexit, so I think it'll be interesting to see those two cities jostle for position. But when you look at New York, from a crime perspective, from a culture perspective, lifestyle, and you see the products that are being developed for the ultra-high net worth, you know, the properties that are being developed, it's not surprising that there's been a draw back to that, and you know, New York has come out on top. But I think you'll always see London and New York jostle for that top position.
Well, that was Richard Hardie. He's the CEO of Knight Frank South Africa. This is Classic Business.